Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Authorsphere. I'm your host, Dan Alatorre. Joining me again this time around is Kevin Chapman. Kevin, welcome aboard. Good to have you back.
Glad to be here, Dan. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, it's always a pleasure to have another author on board, especially somebody who's doing things the right way. As I always like to tell you, it seems like that's what you're doing. So keep up the good work. You got a new book out. Very exciting times. The holidays right around the corner. So tell us how everything's going.
Things are going pretty well. I mean, for a guy with a day job, I keep finding a way to get a book out every year. So I think once a year is a pretty good schedule for me.
Hey, I'll be lucky if I get a book out once a year this year. I'm pushing for that December 31st deadline. Now, it's important to note, you do have a very serious daytime job. I don't know if you mentioned that ever, but it's definitely a job that would keep, just from the title, it's the type of job that would keep anybody busy more than 40 hours a week and probably closer to 60. And yet, like you said, you still find time to write books, narrate your audio books, among other things, spend time with the family. So how do you manage to squeeze it all in?
Well, it's the last part. You said spend time with the family. My kids are all grown and out of the house. So all that time I used to spend taking care of my children is now available. So there I am.
Running the softball practice is no longer a thing, huh?
Yeah, or basketball games, or soccer games, or music concerts, or school plays, or all that stuff is now a thing of the past. So it gives me a little bit of extra time.
So they're grown and out of the house. Any grandkids yet?
No, unfortunately, although I do have a wedding coming up next summer, so we are definitely looking forward to that.
Yeah, exciting times. Yeah, I'm a few years away from that. My daughter is 12. So knock on wood, we get a little bit of time there. But let's tell our audience about your new book and how it's doing, and give a brief summary of what they can look forward to in this latest edition of yours.
Sure. Well, the new book is called Dead Winner. And the tagline for the book is, "When is a hot blonde with a $60 million lottery ticket a problem?" And in this case, the story is about a lawyer, and I'm being a lawyer. It's not about me, but the character is a lawyer who is brought into a situation that he's very uncomfortable with when his old friends, Tom and Monica, ask him to set up a trust to claim the winnings of a giant lottery prize. And everything goes great until Tom is then discovered dead 3 days later on the floor of his apartment from what appears to be a self-inflicted gunshot wound. And Monica, the now widow, is a woman who Rory, the lawyer, has long held a flame for, and now is thrust into a position where she needs him to be her lawyer and her protector and her private detective, because the winning lottery ticket is missing.
Yeah, I thought not only was the synopsis very laced with intrigue, but the story unfolds at a really nice pace. I should mention, I was lucky enough to read this one, I guess before it came out, right? When was the release date on that?
The release date for the paperback was in September. The Kindle just came out on November 22nd. But yeah, you got a preview of an early copy, which was great. Thank you so much for doing that read for me. Your quote is on the back cover of the paperback, so I do appreciate that.
I'm flattered. It was a good story, and I like like you said, you've got, first of all, anytime you have one of those lottery winners you see on TV, and it's like, oh, I would do this if I had the money. I would do that if I had the money. And of course, then if things go bad, that's a lot of intrigue. And then of course, to have the former romantic flame kind of situation adds the pressure. So I thought it was a really, really creative plot you came up with. Some nice twists along the way in that story, and I enjoyed reading it. I was very flattered to be asked.
Thanks. I mean, the fundamental concept for me in this story was I wanted a protagonist who was not a superhero. He's not a soldier. He's not a cop. He's not a spy. He's just a guy who's a trust and estates lawyer, and he's a little dweebish, and he's a little lonely, and he wonders whether, if he was ever put in a position where he had to try to be the hero, could he be the hero? And that's really the crux of the story, is whether he can or can't fill that role and win the girl and save the day. And you'll have to read the book to find out what happens.
Well, I think stories like that are more interesting anyway. If you start out with a superhero, you shoot Superman and the bullets bounce off his chest, it's like, okay, I can't really associate with that. But somebody who's, like you say, more of a normal guy, whereas in the old Hitchcock movies, they used to say, ordinary man in extraordinary circumstances. That's like you and me getting in the car and driving to the store, and all of a sudden we find ourselves in extraordinary circumstances. To me, that's more compelling than somebody who starts out as some brute who can take on 6 guys in a bar fight and fight his way out of it. I'm not James Bond. I like looking at James Bond to say, wow, that's cool. I wish I could do that. But he's basically a superhero. I prefer the stories where it's more of the common guy. And it's like, well, that guy's like me. So I identify a little more with that. And I think your audience will definitely find that appealing.
I hope so. And I also set the story in the same universe as my the series that I've been working on, the Mike Stoneman thriller series, which is taking a little pause. I got 5 books into that series, and the 5th book finishes up in its time sequence in January of 2020, right at the beginning of COVID. And I decided I really didn't want to write books about my cops during COVID, interviewing criminals with masks on and worrying about the pandemic. And I just wanted to get away from that. So that's why I went to a standalone story that's not a Mike Stoneman story. But there are a few characters from this book in Dead Winter who come out of the Mike Stoneman universe, and it's set in the same fictional environment as Mike Stoneman's New York. So that was kind of fun too, to give those other characters a chance to spread their wings just a little bit.
Well, I like the crossover appeal. It's like if I'm enjoying the one series, maybe I have some favorite characters or whatever, and then this is a bit of a departure, and there's nothing that says these guys don't meet up somewhere down the road or could share a story together or something like that. Most of my stories take place in Tampa, and so it seems logical. Like I think I mentioned this before when we spoke. If there's a law firm, why shouldn't I use the law firm? I'm writing about cops, but if they're talking to a lawyer, why shouldn't it be from the law firm where my other characters in the other book were? I mean, there seems like there's only going to be one fire marshal. Why wouldn't it be the same one? That kind of thing.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of authors do that, and they drop in little, what you might call Easter eggs, where there's a character or there's a setting or there's something that happens in one book that comes back and becomes something important in another book, a future book. And I love the concept of the author thinking far enough ahead that, okay, I'm going to drop this little reference into this book, and then 2 books from now, that's going to become something important. And for my fans who remember, they're going to get a big kick out of the fact that, oh, I remember that. I saw that from 2 books ago. And sure, it's fun for the readers to have a chance to pick up on that.
And to know it's interlaced, like you're reading with a little more enthusiasm or anticipation, let's say. There's something I'm reading today going to be important in a book down the road. That's 3-dimensional chess kind of thinking. I don't intentionally do that in my books, but I can look back and say, oh, when I had this happen, I can draw on that. Then people will think I planned it, but I'm here to tell you, I didn't plan it. It just kind of worked out where that was able to be used, so to speak. Now, speaking of Stoneman, so 5 books and done, or are you going to continue on?
Oh, my plan is to go back to Mike Stoneman and his group. Probably, I'm working on another standalone book at the moment that will be out, I'm hoping, 2023. And then I think I'll go back to Mike and his group. That story will probably pick up in the summer of 2023, I think, in the timeline. So it'll be about 3 years forward. There'll be a gap in that timeline, which will give Mike's partner and his new wife a chance to have their baby and have a small child, and that's going to add another layer of interest, I think, in those characters. So that's my plan. I haven't quite got that book sketched out yet, but it's my plan to go back there.
So when you release the book, say again, if it's summer of 2023, that's when that book will be occurring as well, and that's when you're releasing. So it's kind of like real time. It releases today, I'm reading it today, and the story's taking place today,
or at least in the relatively recent past. It'll be post-COVID, that's for sure. I mean, I'm hoping we're now in the COVID world, at least mostly.
It depends on where you live. In LA,
Yeah.
I don't think they're past it, but most of the rest of the world seems like we've all moved on. I'm in Florida, so we never really did COVID. So, we're kind of like COVID, nah, we'll catch you later. But my stories, I didn't actually deal with it. The timing kind of rolled out to where I had written some stuff, I was releasing some stuff, and I was writing some stuff, and it just didn't. It didn't. Well, again, I have a Florida perspective. The window here was short enough where I didn't really feel I needed to address it, and I still had a book released during that time. But I had two books actually, and one was kind of set more of a fantasy kind of story, so it kind of didn't matter when it came out. But I think the long term was the mask thing is going to end eventually. So do I want to memorialize it in a book, or do I really just kind of want to skip over it because it wasn't pleasant? And why do I want to remind people of that? But I've read stories where people are in the middle of the pandemic, which now makes it more immediately dated. Which is probably what you're referring to there.
Yeah, the story in Dead Winter is set in a timeless environment. There are no references at all to years. There's no references to political events or world events that would put it in a particular time. And that was very intentional on my part. I didn't want 22 or 2021 or whatever. It's just there. And until technology advances to the point where somehow there's the cell phones that they're using or whatever are become archaic, it exists in no particular time. I couldn't really do that with the Mike Stoneman books, because from the very beginning there, I had a very specific date, and there were dates in the books. Every chapter had a date on it. As the very first book was a serial killer story, and it was all based on the passage of the calendar, because the serial killer had a pattern of killing on the last Saturday of the month. And so it was August of 2018 when the story starts, and so it's September, and then it's October, and when will the next Saturday come around? And from that point forward, I was kind of stuck with the timeline. For the next book was the early 2019, and then the next book was the summer of 2019, and that worked out actually fine in those stories, and it was going great until suddenly 2020 came around, and it's like, I really don't want to keep this going into 2020. So that's when I took a little break. These are the things you have to deal with.
Well, it's like you said, when I first started writing, in my mind, I had my characters doing things, and one of my critique partners was kind of like, wouldn't they probably just look this up on their cell phone somebody was trying to do something. And I was like, yeah, I didn't really like the cell phones. So I would purposely kind of put my characters in a situation like they're out in the middle of the woods and they don't have phone reception, so cell phones aren't a factor. In this latest one I'm working on, they use them a lot because they're calling back and forth, they're looking things up like we all do, but it was a bit of a transition there.
Yeah, you'll find this amusing. The very first book I ever wrote was back in the mid 1990s, and there was a very, very significant plot point in this book that the principal character, who was a private detective, gets a phone message on his answering machine, but he's on an airplane, and so the answering machine cuts out and he doesn't get to hear the message on the answering machine. And so, until the plane lands, and then he tries to call into his, the whole technology thing. The story now is so dated because, oh, really? Why wouldn't you be able to just get the message on your, on your email from the phone, from the plane? It's a completely different world.
Yeah, when the answering machines first came out, you had like a beeper device you had to hold up to the receiver of your phone, and that would play the thing back for you. And what's that? Maybe the 70s, or yeah, I guess somewhere around there. But my dad had one, right? And even some of the terminology, like, well, the fact that I called it a cell phone, right? My daughter basically only knows cell phones, so it's just a phone.
It's the phone. It's a mobile, right?
Yeah, not even that, just phone, right? So, and also hanging up, because you end a call, you don't hang it up anymore. So there was a little thing that, you know, friends point out. It's like, hey, it's not really what you call it. And
here's a way to confuse a teenager: is hand them a phone with a dial and tell them to dial the phone, a rotary dialer.
you remember those days? Hey, I got one.
We're old. We're old.
So when I was a kid, my phone number was 53324. That was it.
Oh, lots of small numbers. Good, easy to
Yeah.
dial.
Well, small town, right? And so that's what I remember of it. That's, you know, 70s, or oh, it's probably before the 70s, somewhere in there it switches, right? And became 8953324. But when I was first learning phone numbers, you're like in school, you're filling out a little booklet thing, and you put down your phone number, just 53324. It's like on Seinfeld, he goes, put me through to Brooklyn 997.
Yeah.
What the heck is that? And that was later than that. So I don't know why I was doing that.
Well, listen, one of the things we are always looking at is trying to sketch out plots and sketch out, you know, what's going to happen in a story. And you just hope that, that you can put it together in a way that makes sense for your readers now. And you hope that something doesn't happen a year from now that makes it all obsolete.
Yeah, like
I mean, think about DNA, right? I mean, the concept of DNA evidence is now so ubiquitous. Everybody, okay, well, why don't you just match the DNA and then you'll find the killer? Well, it used to be there was no DNA, and so you had to find other pieces of evidence to link the killer to the crime. And what a change in the world it is now. If you read crime novels from back in the 50s and 60s, and you think, oh, why didn't they just do this? Well, they didn't have that.
But we know they didn't have those things. It's other people who are like, wait a minute, how archaic. It's really easy to see when you're watching an old movie, right? That dialing the phone, or how they would click. I was watching something, they were in a hotel. I think they were in a hotel, and she takes the phone and she taps the little button where you hang it up, taps that a bunch of times to get the operator. I'm like, we never were able to do that when I was a kid. Maybe that would have worked. I don't know, but I would have done it. You see it in movies, though. It's like tap, 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 operator, you know.
Well, there's always things that are you can think about. I mean, you do the same thing. You're reading a science fiction story, and you once the author establishes that there's this gizmo that will do X, whatever that is, and then the readers will say, well, why didn't you use that gizmo to do X that time? Because it would have, you know, saved the day. It's like, okay, whatever. You assume that it exists, and so you have to use it.
Yeah, it's tricky. When you're writing your novel, like you said, to make it as timeless as possible, so it has more staying power. But what we use for a phone right now, there'll be a new version of it, but hopefully it won't change so much that it makes the story become dated. And oh, that one would be from 2022, because in 2023 they came out with laser beams into your head and you didn't use phones anymore or whatever. But it's always a good idea to write with that in mind. Like, let's not limit ourselves to the extent possible. But there are other things where it has to be so.
Sometimes I feel like it's nice to write about the past, where you can set a story in a time period and you can be sure about what happened in that time period. Yeah, but I've never gotten into the historical fiction, not yet.
Well, and the reader goes it well, but you wrote one in the 90s, so you kind of did.
Yeah.
But the
wasn't intended to be historical.
Yeah, exactly. Well, but they all turn out to be that in the long run. If we stay around long enough, the older works become historical fiction, let's say. So that's why if you go to watch a what do they call them, period piece, or read a more period piece type book, you can tell from the cover, they've got those corsets and stuff. This is set last century or 2 centuries ago, and we're not going to be worried about cell phones.
Definitely not.
So I think I asked you this before. How long do you figure your Stoneman series and the new one? Is it, well, on the new ones, you said the one's going to be a standalone. Are they both standalones?
Yes. Yeah.
So
the Dead Winter has
no sequels?
No, there's no sequel for Dead Winter. And obviously when you get to the end of Dead Winter, you'll realize there's really no place to go from that perspective. I don't imagine I'll bring Rory McIntyre back in some future book to do something. I mean, I might, but this is definitely not a series. And the one I'm working on now is also not at all a series. It's a very one and done kind of idea. And I will admit that part of my thinking was that I was trying to attract the attention of literary agents who might be interested in picking me up, because I had been told by multiple literary agents that they are not interested in picking up a series that has already started. So if you've self-published the first 2 books or 3 books of a series, they don't want to jump in and take that, because apparently the traditional publishing houses just not interested in picking it up in the middle. And so I figured, okay, let me write a book that's not part of the series and see what I can do with that. And I had many agents tell me, I really like the book, but I just don't think that I can take you and sell you to Random House. So no thanks. Yeah, it's fine.
Would you consider writing a different series?
Oh, sure. But I mean, at this point, I think I've now gotten that out of my system. The concept of traditional publishing. I'm at this point in my life, in my writing career, I think I'm just going to say, forget it. I'm going to continue to be independent. I've got a publicist now that's working on advertising for me, and I'm trying to make it into more of a real business than it was 5 years ago when I really got started. So that's out of me. But I do want to do this one more book, and then I probably go back to Mike Stoneman, although I have been seriously thinking about spinning off a second series that's based upon some of the characters in that series that are not Mike Stoneman.
Yeah, like who? And, who's an interesting enough character to warrant their own series?
It would be Mike's partner, Jason Dixon.
So they break up.
Nah, well, break up. Yeah, I mean, one of the things one of the things I set up in the last couple of books was the question of whether Jason, who's early 30s and is just getting married, and his new wife is pregnant, whether he wants to be a career cop, whether he wants to put in 20-25 years on the NYPD like Mike Stoneman had done. And so I set up the concept that maybe he doesn't. So maybe he leaves the force and takes a job in private industry. Maybe he becomes a private detective or a chief of security for some company. And I actually had a thought that he might be working for a law firm as an investigator. So there are ways that he can branch out and have his own set of stories, but still interact with Mike Stoneman and still have some crossover, but maybe do a separate sort of sub-series. So I'm thinking about that. And I'm also thinking about going back to Mike.
It's an interesting avenue because, like you said, if he goes to work for a law firm, most people aren't thinking that law firms need investigative stuff done, like sure in a criminal case, but they're not thinking about outside of that. And I imagine there's lots of things that need to be looked into from that end.
Oh yeah, I mean, white collar crime,
right.
and you know, obviously anything that's criminal, you're gonna need investigators, and particularly investigators who have connections to the police, so that they have avenues to get information, and that I think there's a lot you can do with that. So that's something I've got in the back of my head, and I will eventually make a final decision about what the next book is going to be. But there's places I can go.
Yeah, if you establish the premise, once you establish it, you're off to the races. And he could still, like you said, he could still work with Stoneman as needed for the Stoneman books. So it doesn't limit you. Who else? What other characters might be warranted to have their own series?
Well, I also have a medical examiner who's actually Mike's love interest, Dr. Michelle McNeil, who's the county medical examiner for New York. I mean, there have been lots of books written about MEs, and they obviously get involved in all kinds of investigatory activities relating to the bodies that come into the morgue.
Sure.
I'm not sure I want to go there, but that's another place you theoretically could go with those characters.
No doubt about it. So Stoneman's got a future. Where would you figure how many books is enough, or do you just keep going until you are no longer interested?
Well, I think I keep going as long as I have stories that I'm having fun with, and as long as the readers are responding to it and telling me that they're interested in the next one. When, you know, how do you tell whether the readers are interested? Well, I mean, you're probably right one book too many.
Yeah.
And then
It's
you
like
find out, yeah, people are not that interested anymore.
like the
Um,
athletes, they say when you're supposed to retire, usually a year before you do. So you
yeah, a
have
year
a
ago. Yeah,
terrible
that's about
season,
right.
and everybody's like, like we have Tom Brady down here in Tampa, right? And everybody's thinking, he should retire. Well, then he came down here and he won the Super Bowl, and they were like, well, he's still got gas left in the tank. And then this year they're looking at him and they're thinking, maybe he's not done with football, maybe he's just done with Tampa. And I was like, fair enough. He came here, got us a Super Bowl. I'm happy. Thanks a lot. Go on and do it for somebody else. I'm very happy that he came and got a Super Bowl for us. But for most players, it's they usually stay 1 or 2 seasons too long. But that's how in a book, I guess the sales drop or whatever, or the fan letters quit, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's hard to figure that, but I will. I'm still writing for myself more than anything else. So when I get tired of it, that's when I'll stop doing it.
So let me ask you, what compelled you to start writing in the first place? Because you were busy doing other things at that time.
Well, listen, I'm a writer by nature. I'm a lawyer by trade, but lawyers are like me are writers. I'm an employment lawyer, so my life is telling stories. Usually, they are taking a series of facts and trying to put them together in a way that tells a compelling story for a court or for an administrative agency or for a client or for an arbitrator. So it's what I do. Is I write stories, and I always had the aspiration to write the great American novel, and spent 10 years of my life doing that when my kids were kind of your age. And when you're doing that, it's you write for an hour, and then on a weekend you write for 2 hours, and 2 years later you go back to the book and you write 3 or 4 more chapters, and 10 years later you're finally done. And that was a project that kept me busy and kept me interested, and was interesting and fun. But it really wasn't until after I got that done and my kids were out of college, and I had quiet in the house, that I decided to really go and write something a little more fun for me, and more saleable to to the public,
Well,
which is
you have
when I
more
started
life
writing Mike
experience
Stoneman.
too by that point, so you can bring more things to the table to make the writing more interesting.
I hope so. I mean, I've been around the block a few times at this point.
Yeah, you write that same book when you're 20 years old. It doesn't have the gravitas. It's more narrow focused, and the characters are less appealing and more direct in what they're going to do.
Well, I think that's true. Although I do think that for all writers, you get better at it the more you do it, and so the earlier you start, the earlier you get to the point where you're really have it figured, and you can write stories that will be better, and that readers will respond to better. If I could have done that in my 30s, maybe I would have dropped out of being a lawyer and become a professional writer. At this point, I'm a few years away from retirement, and I'm hoping that I will eventually be a full-time writer in my post day job life.
So when would you say you started? I mean, did you always write as a kid? Were you writing like stories and stuff, or was it a latent interest that you never really pursued at all until whatever, 10 years ago or more?
No, it's always been there. I actually wrote poetry as a teen. That was my big thing, which is great because it's short, right? It's not 20 pages or 100 pages. I really liked writing. I was a literature major in college, and I remember having a professor who taught a class. This is one of the most fun classes I ever took in college. It was called Studies in American Literature, Popular Fiction, which we referred to as lit. And it was so we read Dracula, we read Frankenstein, we read The Maltese Falcon, we read Rebecca, we read all stories that were sort of iconic popular fiction stories. And so the premise of the class was, what about these books made them popular, made
like
them
that premise.
million sellers, and makes them books that people still read decades and centuries after they were originally written.
You can enjoy, which is, a different factor, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was books you could take on the subway and read, and you didn't feel self-conscious. You're not reading Plato on the subway. You're reading you're reading the Maltese Falcon on the subway. We had a Mickey Spillane novel. It was great. But one of the books that we read was a story called The Rancher's Revenge, and I forget who the author was.
Never
I
heard
still
of
have a
that.
copy. Yeah, I have a copy on my shelf over there, but it was supposed to be an example of the Western. Okay, I mean, the Western is a whole genre of literature. So what makes Westerns interesting, and what makes people want to read them, and what are the themes that you see in this book
Now,
that make it
is that a
compelling?
classic Western, that Rancher's Revenge?
I don't know. I mean, I had never heard of it before we read it for this class, but the professor thought it was.
Well,
But
that's
we
all
got to
that
the
matters.
end of the book, and I hated the ending to the book. I thought the
Really?
ending of the book was awful. And I talked to the professor about it, and I explained to him why I thought that there were things that should have happened that didn't happen, and the things that did happen didn't make sense. And I really thought it was terrible. So he looked at me and he said, "Fine, you think you could do better? Do better. You write the ending." So I said, "Fine, I'll go write the ending."
So
So I
for
spent the
that book,
next
right?
month that book. So I spent the next month rewriting the ending of that book, and turned it into him and said, "Here, this is much better." And he said, "You're right," and he gave me an A.
Not bad.
And that was the first time I tried to write it wasn't a whole story. It was just
Sure.
the ending of a story that somebody else had already written. But I loved that. It was so much fun to take those characters and figure out what should have happened in this story to make it better. But then I went to law school, and then I got a job, and I got married and had kids. And
Yeah.
so the
Time and
idea of
priorities
becoming a
totally
writer,
change.
yeah. But I was always there. It was always something I enjoyed doing and wanted to do. So it was a germ that just was sitting there waiting to grow.
Well, it's like anything else. My dad always wanted to learn to play the piano, right? He could play, but he played by ear, and he always wanted to take lessons. Well, he made us take lessons. I kind of hated piano lessons. I was like, Dad, go for it. You'll see what it was like. And he took a few. I don't know, maybe for a couple months, and then he decided he didn't like piano lessons. Like, yeah, neither did I. You made me ride on my bike over to Mrs. Wagner's house and sit there, and she was an old lady. She smelled funny, but it was a nice piano, big grand piano, but I couldn't make it sound good. Nothing I did on that thing sounded good. She was a virtuoso, but and a great teacher. She taught my brothers and sisters, and were really good at it, but didn't interest me, and the lessons just didn't take. Now you're talking about the evolution of your stories. Would you say the more recent books are more complicated in their plots or simpler than, like, say, the first Stoneman book versus the most recent one?
Well, the most recent book, that Dead Winter, has a very complicated plot. Probably more so than any of the Mike Stoneman books. The Stoneman books are all pretty standard police procedurals in the sense of, I mean, there's one crime, or there's one murder, or there's something going on that you're trying to solve. There's always twists and turns in that investigation, but in each case there's really kind of one plot. In this story, there's a couple of different things that are interwoven, and the funnest part about this book for me was that I had the plot. I figured out this sort of what was the main plot of the story, but I decided that it really wasn't interesting enough. I mean, it was interesting, okay, but it wasn't. There was something missing from it, and so the way the book is structured is there's the story that was supposed to happen, and then there's the intervening events and intervening incidents that made what was supposed to happen go wrong. And so trying to figure out how it was supposed to go and what was supposed to happen at the end, when you're trying to piece it together and say, wait a minute, now I understand what was supposed to happen and what did happen. And that was supposed to be how it came together. Hopefully it does. But that was a lot of fun to really kind of take the story, break it apart, and then put it back together again in a different way. But I think that's a story I would not have been able to write successfully 5 years ago. Having gone through what I've gone through in the other books has definitely made me a better writer and better able to take something like that and put it together in a way that is both short enough and paced well enough to keep the reader interested. And that's the biggest challenge. Is, I mean, the book that I wrote, it's called A Legacy of One, my attempt at the great American novel, had a whole lot of interlocking pieces, but the first version of that story that was self-published in, I want to say 2016, was 150,000 pages. I mean, 150,000 words. It was way too long.
150,000 pages would be.
Yeah, no, 150,000 pages. That was like 400 pages.
Well, 150,000 words is almost like two novels.
Yeah, it's two. And then I cut it down. I re-edited it later and cut it down to the point where it's palatable. But that's the hardest thing, I think, is taking a story and writing it concisely enough that it fits into a book that somebody can pick up and pick up on the airplane in New York and finish before they arrive in LA. It's maybe not quite that.
It's not assigned reading. It's not required reading. It's leisure reading. So if it doesn't have a good pace and all that kind of stuff, it probably doesn't get finished and gets set down and not reviewed well, et cetera, et cetera. So the pacing is definitely important, but it's a delicate balance to have the complexity that the readers want in solving the puzzle they're trying to solve along with the detectives, and keeping it moving, but still, making sure there's enough there, but not too much.
Yeah, well, that's why you need good beta readers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I've tried my first murder mystery was almost like two stories, not two books, but two stories that kind of eventually connected. And so that was fun, but I don't think readers enjoyed that because it was really like two stories for half the book. And so the one I did after that, the sequel, the second book of that series, was much more linear, let's say. And it's more, it probably for a year or two was way more popular than the first book in the series. So I was like, okay, lesson learned. But for me, writing it, we're writing this thing maybe weeks, months, right? So I wonder if my own lack of patience makes me want to, well, let's add something else now, to keep the interest. And that usually there's a little of that is good, too much of that is not so hot.
Well, you never know. I recently got a review of one of the books in the Mike Stoneman series, and the reviewer said that he got through the first 35 pages and was bored and not enough was happening, and so he just stopped reading. Okay, well, all right, my bad for not keeping you interested enough in the first 35 pages that you wanted to keep reading the book. But you know what? You just never know. You can't keep everybody
35
happy.
Pages. That's longer than I would have hung around. If I didn't find something interesting in maybe the first 10, and that's being a little generous sometimes. But I've read something that said readers will they're way more patient about the book getting going, let's say, than authors are. I always feel like it's got to start on page 1 and be exciting from there, depending on what type of story it is. Different type of excitement, right? Intrigue or mysterious or whatever. And gosh, I can't remember, but I think it was like somebody said 70 pages was the average. Maybe it was 35, but something like 70. I was like, 70 pages? You're waiting to 70 pages before you decide if it's any good? God bless you. I hope you have 1.5 million friends who all pick up my books, You're gonna wait 70 pages.
Yeah, I agree with you though. I think you have to have something happen in the first chapter that makes it interesting enough that the reader wants to keep reading to the second chapter. I think you do better if you're writing a series and you have readers who know you and have read the earlier books in the series, and they know that there's characters, they know that things are going to happen, they trust you a little bit more. And they'll keep reading because they have confidence that it's going to be a good book. But somebody picks up one of your books randomly, particularly if it's a book that's in the middle of a series, and things don't develop fairly quickly, I think you lose them. So I agree with you. Something's got to happen early, and then you got to keep them going.
People do that all the time. And so I write with the knowledge that if I'm writing book 3 in the series, somebody might start with book 3, right? And you just have to deal with it. And if they like it, maybe they go back and read book 1 and book 2, which does happen. But on the production end of it, we're like, just read them in order, then it makes more sense. There's less explaining, it's easier. But
well, you probably have the same problem. Is how much do you tell a reader of book 3 about things that happened in books 1 and 2? How much do you have to explain about backstories of the characters of things that happened in the earlier books? And that's a hard thing to balance. I mean, you want new readers to get it.
You've got a bunch of those books now.
I made the decision that my readers don't need to know anything that's not absolutely essential for this book.
That's pretty much how I put each book. I kind of write as a standalone, and they're coming to book 4 knowing there were 3 books before it, and that there may be a few references they're not going to get. If they don't get it and that makes them unhappy, why did you start with book 4? You should have known that. But as far as any backstory or reintroduction, it's like, it's now the flip side of that is how long between books, right? So even if somebody's reading every book and you put them out, when you put them out, if you made them wait a year, then it doesn't hurt to have a couple of little references to remind them, because you can't expect them to go back and read book 1 again to refresh themselves for book 2. So a little, but it goes a long way. And
but you have to be judicious.
It's not necessary for the second book. Don't put it in. J.K. Rowling did that. That's where I learned that from. When I was reading the second book in the Harry Potter stories, I was like, okay, the world's most popular author, how does she deal with people who picked up book 2? And it was just very brief references. And I thought, it's perfect. It's enough to remind somebody, because the books took a while between books.
I remember.
Remind somebody. I know, how am I saying that wrong? It's enough to get somebody up to speed, but it's not so much that if somebody literally just finished book 2 and just finished book 1 and started book 2, that they're wading through a bunch of it. And but again, that's from an author standpoint. Readers are much more forgiving on that kind of stuff from what I've read in surveys and stuff.
Well, I'm going to have an interesting experience coming up for me in that, and I'm taking a stab at writing a serialization, which is, it's going to be published in an online magazine starting next, I think it's May, and it's going to be 2,000 words per issue for 10 issues. So the story is going to be 20,000 words, but it's going to be broken up into 10 relatively short chapters.
So are they like a chapter, or are they like short stories?
No. This is one story that's going to be serialized over 12 issues of the magazine. So it's going to be like writing one of the old, in the old movies, right? When you had an episode, and you have to leave it on a cliffhanger so that the people will come back and read the next chapter. Wow. It's not going to be a cliffhanger every episode, but you have to write each episode to be a standalone chapter, but you also have to have enough going on at the very end of the chapter to make people anticipate what's going to come next month and keep them reading from one month to the next.
Monthly, so you got to wait a month between segments.
Oh yeah, monthly. So it'll be over 10 months that I'll be writing this 10 episodes of this one story. So do you know
what it's going to be about? Do you have the plot? Have you written any?
Oh yeah. I have the whole plot set out. It's not a detective story at all. The magazine actually caters a lot toward romance, and so there's a little bit of that in this story.
You have some romantic lines in your.
There's some romance in my books, but there's also a dead body, and there's an intrigue, and have to have that for me. But it's going to be fun for me to try to break it up into 10 pieces. And it's not a whole novel. It's not 80,000 words. It's only going to be 20 or maybe 25,000 words.
It's a whole story in 20,000.
It's a whole story. Yeah, it's a whole story.
See, that's hard. That would be hard for me, because for people watching. So let's say, what's your word count of a typical Mike Stoneman, and how many pages printed does that turn out to be?
It's maybe 80,000 words, which is just 320 pages, 350 pages, maybe. But that's.
So you scale that back, it'd be like it's a novella. Split over 20, which is you're gonna have your beginning, middle, and end, maybe in what would have been a fourth of the time that you have for your novel.
Right. You're gonna have to
So
cut out things like descriptions and a lot of backstory on characters, and you're gonna have to figure out how to get the points across in a very short amount of time in terms of
well,
your
like, you do a
words.
good job at that. I think the challenge for me would be getting to the end fast enough. Um, I just don't. I'm not practiced at doing that. If I write a short story, it's 2,000 words and it's done, or 3,000, it's done, maybe 5,000. 20,000, I've never tried to hit that. And people have said, write a novella, give it away for free to start your series or whatever. I'm like, no, they're already up and running. I don't want to write a prequel kind of thing. So I just have never done it. I've never tried because I'm kind of intimidated. Like, once I get a good idea, I'm always thinking book length. And I think if I really tried to make it that short, that would be a real challenge for me. So how do you view the challenge?
It's a real mountain to scale, and I'm already having trouble with it because the story that I've written could easily be a whole novel. And I'm actually thinking maybe when I'm done with this, I'll take it and make it into a whole novel someday. But I have to cut it down, and I have to break it up into small enough pieces that I can fit them into these 2,000 to 2,500 word segments for each episode of the magazine. So it's been tough. I did a short story over the summer, just because I woke up one day with an idea for a story that I knew wasn't going to be a novel, but I really liked it, and so I wrote it just as a short story. I've published that, like you said, it's a freebie, so it's available for nothing, and helps people kind of get into me. It's called the Car, the Dog, and the Girl. But it's a very focused story about a guy and what happens to him over about a 24-hour period. This is going to be a much longer sort of timeline for this story that I'm writing for the serialization, which doesn't have a title yet, which is another problem.
Well, can you tell us the basic plot line of it?
Well, the basic plot is it's about a young girl, she's out of college, couple of years, and is brought back to her home on a farm in sort of semi-suburban area, maybe like 100 miles outside of a major city, because her father has died and he's the last remaining member of the family who was living on the farm. And she goes back to the hometown figuring she's just going to settle up the estate, sell the house, sell the farm, get the hell out and go back to the city. And there's a lot of bad memories for her that come back from this, her childhood on this farm. Her brother had died on the farm earlier, and so she's just getting ready to go, but they find a body that is uncovered after a storm on the property. Ooh. And the question is, who is this? Who was this, and how did they get buried in the bank by the creek out by the pasture? And that leads her into a lot of the history of what had happened on this farm, and her father and her brother and the family, and she ultimately has to face the question of does she want to stay or does she want to leave? And she has a boyfriend who she had in high school who's come back to the hometown, and they get back together again. And so it's all really about ghosts. It's about the ghosts of her past that she has to confront and then figure out what she wants to do with the rest of her life. And that's a complicated story. Why did I want to write something that complicated and put it into this format? But I'm stuck with it now, so I got to do it.
Well, the beauty of it is after 3 or 4 what do you call them, segments? Mm-hmm. 3 or 4, there's going to be how many total? 12 or 20?
10.
After 3 or 4, you'll know how much you can expand and how much you have to contract out of your outline, I guess, right? Because you know where it's got to end. I got 7 more segments. It's got to get to here. But so do you outline? Is the thing outlined already, or do you typically?
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm a compulsive outliner. I can't start writing anything until I have outlined every scene or at least every important event that's going to happen in the story from the beginning to the end. Then I can go back and start writing. So the outline's 32 pages.
For the 32 pages for the
outline. The outline is 32 pages. So yeah. So
I think you accidentally wrote the story there.
I kind of did. Yeah. So I've got some work to do to pare it down. And listen, you know how it goes. You write a story that has a backstory, and the back, it's like an iceberg, right? The story is the part that's sticking up out of the water, and the big part of the story is all underwater. That's, you know, all the backstory that you're never going to actually get on the page, but you
Well,
have to
didn't
know that it's there.
Tale of Two Cities was originally a serialized story, and some other classics, I guess maybe by Dickens, I think. A couple of his stories were serialized. So I think it's going to bring a lot of good pressure, right? From pressure comes diamonds. I think I'll have good pressure because if I'm writing an 80,000 word novel and I decide I got this great slam bam ending, but I got to tweak a few things in chapter 1 and 2 to make sure that's cohesive. Do you have that ability? Do you have to have it all 10 segments written before segment 1 publishes?
The answer is no. Although it frightens the hell out of me to
No, no,
think
no.
of.
I'm sure you don't have to, but do you have to for you?
For me, I would have a hard time publishing the first 2 or 3 segments, not being absolutely certain of where we're going, you know, where the ending is going to be. So I have to know where the ending is going to be before I can really start. The problem is going to be not what I know the beginning and I know the end, but getting there is going to be the problem of keeping it short enough and keeping it interesting enough in each segment. It's going to be fun. It's
No,
an
no, no.
online
I think you'll be able to
publication,
keep
so
each segment interesting. I think you'll be able to do that because you're good at that. And you tend to start with a really good premise. You did already. You told us the premise, and it's intriguing. And I don't have any doubt in your ability to end a story, right? But doing it in 10 steps, all 10 steps will be interesting. I'm giving you that. But do they get from A to B, you know, all the way down? But here again, that's the beauty of outlining. You've already figured out what's going to happen. It's got to happen by this point in the story or in the writing. It's got to happen by there, number 10. So, yeah, that's
figure
why.
out where the middle is, right? The middle has to be episode 5. Okay, so I can work my way forward and backward from the middle. Maybe
Did
that's
you
the
ever
way to
do
go.
anything with Kindle Vella and all that? Because that was kind of serialized stories.
No, I have not done that. But you're right. It's the same concept: is short works that are either serialized or just a lot of short
Well, I was going to say,
stories.
what you see if you go there is a lot of stories that got started and didn't get finished because it was exciting and we cruise on for a while. And I'm guilty of that too. I had a neat idea and I started writing it and I thought, well, no big deal. I'll jump on here, spend a weekend a couple times a month, and I'll get these things lined up, which I did. And then I had a regular novel that was like, ooh, if I don't start this novel here, I won't have it done by its deadline. And now I'm trying to serve 2 masters. And then I had another story on there, which was something I had already written. So I was just dropping it in segments. So that part was handled. But like anything else, you got to market to Vela now. Instead of just a big monster, you have to market to a little monster. And as we've said before, I'm not a great marketer. So the serialized story was kind of like a horror story. It was well received, and I had interesting characters. I had an interesting plot, and in my mind, I knew exactly what else was going to happen, how it was going to end. But time became a precious commodity all of a sudden, and so I was like, I'm not going to be able to spend time on that serialized story anymore. And I didn't really have a written outline for it, but I knew, you know, this, and then it'll end. And it was going to be, it probably would have been that novella length by the time I finished with it. I don't think it was going to be a big story.
So where is it now? What happened to it?
Well, I think I had maybe 10 chapters, episodes, whatever they're called on Vella. And it wasn't getting a lot of reads because if you didn't know who I was, you didn't know if the story was there, right? There were other big names who rolled out and, you know, knocked us medium players or small players down to our level. And so the people who were reading it were the people who were reading my newsletter, reading my books anyway. So I just went in with a newsletter. I said, yeah, and I told them what I just told you. I got to write this other book, which means I got to start this other book, and I'm going to juggle the 2. And then after a month, I was like, I'm not going to be able to juggle the 2. This one's got to pull the plug on it. Sorry. And I mentioned it in more than one newsletter, and they were all like, hey, we enjoy your stuff. Don't worry about it. That was nice. I'm sure there were a few people very few, because there weren't that many that read it. There were a few people who started into it. But since it was horror stories, the vast majority of my readership doesn't want to read horror stories. They want to read murder mysteries and crime fiction. So, but I like to stretch my wings occasionally and write a romance story and write a horror story or some other kind of adventure. So I'm okay with if it doesn't sell well, because you do have that small percentage of people who are like, I love your stuff. I'll read everything you read. I love your romances. I love your comedies. And it's like, great. That's good.
Is the story still out there? I mean, can people still find it, or is it gone? Is it down?
No, I took it down off Villa. So how it works is it has to remain up there for a certain period of time. And then when I decided I'm not going to be able to finish the story with quality writing. Okay. So then I said, all right, and there's a rule, it's got to be on there 90 days or something, and then they'll let you take it down. As long as I'm not posting new stuff, the reader's going to very quickly figure out, we had a segment a week or whatever for a while, and then haven't had one in 2-3 weeks. But again, I told the newsletter people I got to stop, and I said, maybe over the summer next year I'll finish it up, spend a month or two and wrap it, and then I was able to pull it back down. And I was lucky because it didn't get a lot of negativity doing that, which you would think it would. And I went back and I looked at a bunch of other stories in Vella that had been there roughly the same amount of time. And it's like a lot of people launched into writing stories and weren't able to finish them. And so I figured, okay, that was bad for me to do, but it's not uncommon in the Vella forum. And so, kind of sweet.
Well, you can always go back to it at some point later if you want to and read.
I will, because I hate to read it
it.
unfinished. I have the outline. I just ran out of time to do it, so I'll finish it, but it won't be. And then I'll publish as a book somewhere. It's not going to be my main stuff, so it will be one of the little things that's offshoots.
Well, I'll let you know how this goes with the serialization.
Yeah, I'm very excited.
Be in a.
Are you allowed to tell us the magazine?
Yeah, it's going to be an InD'Tale magazine. So it's IND''Tale. So it's InD'Tale. So it's caters to independent indie authors. So it's InD'Tale.com. So we'll see. That's going to be out next year.
So here's what you do. Just for our viewers, if you want to follow up with that, we'll put a link in the show notes. And then later when it comes out, shoot me an email and I'll update the show notes to have it. It'll go right to your story, the start of the story. Cool. But if they want to start checking out the magazine, it'll be the link will be there.
Yeah, it's actually an interesting magazine. They have a lot of articles about independent authors and by independent authors, and they do book reviews. They do a lot of book reviews.
Cool. I'm definitely have to check it out.
Yeah.
So definitely have to check out the new story over there when you put that out. And when does the first episode drop?
I think it's May of 23. So I have a little time to get episode 1 done.
How much of it have you written besides the outline?
I've written all of the first chapter, the first draft of the first chapter, and half of the second chapter. So it's
okay. So you're making
not bad
progress. There's only 10 of them, so you're already 15%
right.
of the way done. So what do you got on the pipeline? When's the next Stoneman schedule? Well, I think you told us that, but what else is in the works?
No, I mean that's it. I mean, I the Dead Winter is out. I finished that. I did the audiobook version for that over the summer, and that just came out now. So I'm marketing that, and I'm working on the next one, which is called A Good Girl, which is another standalone story that hopefully will be out probably this time next year, if everything goes according to plan. So I'll have that, and I'll have the serialization. That's plenty. I still do have a day job.
You look for a Stoneman book after that, then, right?
Yeah, the next Stoneman book probably isn't until 2024.
Well, I got to tell you, I'm very excited about all this. The marketing's doing well for you.
The marketing is going well. I went out and found a publicity company that is running advertisements for the series, and it's doing fine. The sales are much better than they were when I was trying to do it all myself, because you can't. It's marketing a book is a whole full-time job.
I hate it.
But I finally, when I finished the 5th book of the series for Mike Stoneman, and book 5 is kind of the end of an arc where from the 1st book to the 5th book, there's a subplot involving all the various characters. So it was a good pausing place, but it's a good sort of solid 5-book series now. So I can really market book 1 and try to get people to get into it. And then I'm seeing a lot of reads of book 2 and book 3 and book 4 that I'm not advertising at all.
Yeah.
And so I have to believe that people are reading those because they read book one and they got interested. So I guess
Yeah.
that's that's the formula.
Oh, absolutely. You yeah, you look for some like 80% retention from book one to book two kind of thing. And if you're only marketing book one, then yeah, it was people who are doing read through.
And then the new book, who knows? I mean, it's launched. It seems to be doing okay, but it's not part of the series, so
Yeah.
it's not entirely clear to me how much overlap there will be with people who start with the Stoneman series and then continue on and read the standalone Dead Winter, and how many people will come to Dead Winter and read it and like it, and then go back and read the Stoneman book. So
Well,
we'll
it
see.
works both ways, I think, because you're going to make them wait so long for the next Stoneman book. People who have read the Stoneman books are going to want to read something in between now and then from you, so they'll have this, and it's just a different way to bring eyeballs to the page for you. If somebody did, for whatever reason, wasn't interested in the Stoneman book, this is a different thing for them to consider, and then maybe they transfer over. So it should work both ways, I would think.
Well, we hope. That's
Yeah, right.
as I said.
That's the marketer's job, right?
Yeah, you know what? I say, as long as I'm having fun and enjoying the process, I'll be fine.
Well, that is awesome. So listen, keep us posted. Maybe we can chat again after the first segment or two of the serialization comes out. And give us an update on everything else that's going on book wise, and I'd like that a lot. I'm looking forward to seeing the serialization stuff. In what did you call it? It's indie. What is it called?
InD'Tale.
InD'Tale. I was
So
going
it's
to say independent, but
uh,
that's not it.
yeah, InD'Tale, InD'Tale. So
Awesome.
they try to make
Well,
it fun.
it's been great chatting with you. We've been on for about an hour, so I should probably let you off the hook eventually. Thanks again for joining us. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate being here. And obviously people can find me. It's KevinGChapman.com. That's I try to make that as easy as possible. And yeah, find me and we'll see what we can do.
Books available everywhere. He's on Amazon. He's everywhere. Going to keep on doing it the right way, which is what I love about you, man. All right. Great having you on board. We'll talk to you again sometime soon. Okay.
All right, enjoy the basketball games and watching your teenage daughter grow up. And 20 years or so, you'll be where I am.
I hope so. Knock on wood. All right, man. Thanks again. We'll talk soon.
All right, thank you.